What is the problem with the skeptic community? There have been quite a few videos circulating around YouTube introducing some recent criticism of the skeptic community. I recently did a live stream with longtime atheist YouTuber Noel Plum, where I voiced some of my concerns about an ardent brand of anti-theism both online and on YouTube. I feel many of these anti-theist channels are merely masquerading as pro-science, since most seem to prefer pseudoscience over a growing scientific consensus when it comes to their deeply held anti-religious beliefs. In this video, I'll highlight some of the work of prominent evolutionary biologist David Sloan Wilson, who studies religion from an evolutionary perspective. Hopefully, this video can begin a deeper conversation about religion and atheism and the roles that both of these play in people's lives. Currently, I feel the majority of atheist channels here on YouTube are as pro-pseudoscience as they are anti-religion. Now, they're doing this based on a premise that religion does more harm than good, though I don't believe that premise has come close to meeting any kind of burden of proof. Does religion do more harm than good is a complex question, yet it's a scientific one. And while many prominent scientists have devoted their life's work to answering this question, I feel this work has largely been ignored or even outright avoided by most of the prominent YouTube atheists and the wider skeptic community at large. Dave Cullen made an excellent video on this topic a while back, and I'll link to that in the description below. And while he didn't expressly call out the skeptic community or cite any of the work that I'd like to highlight here, he did bring attention to many of the issues I consider problematic myself for any community that wants to call themselves pro-science. Since this video will undoubtedly rub many anti-theists the wrong way, I'd just like to say at the outset here that myself, and David Sloan Wilson, the guy who I'm going to be citing from for the majority of this video, are both atheists. As Wilson puts it in an article on stealth religions, which I'm going to go into here in depth, I am an atheist. Some readers thought that I must be a religious believer attempting to level the playing field by calling atheism a stealth religion. If theism refers to a belief in supernatural agents capable of intervening in natural processes, then I am 100% an atheist and proud of it. And I couldn't agree more with Wilson here. I myself am an atheist. I don't believe in God. I don't believe in supernatural forces. My problem is that anti-theists are ignoring the very natural forces in favor of a narrative that is not scientifically accurate. And if you're going to call yourself a pro-science community, it flies in the face of reason. So as I mentioned in my live stream with Noel Plum, many atheists subscribe to a brand of anti-theism based around a premise. And that premise is religion does more harm than good. And in that hangout, we discuss a number of common conjectures often cited as evidence by the anti-theist community for this core assertion. Additional claims anti-theists commonly make are that religion causes atrocities from terrorism to war, and that without religion, humanity's irrationality will begin to subside. I think this line of reasoning is both naive and unsupported by the broad scientific evidence. As David Sloan Wilson succinctly points out, new atheists hate religion for causing between-group conflict, and especially for its wanton disregard for the canons of rational thought. Yet both of these problems extend far more widely than religion. Between-group conflict pervades the animal world. Ant colonies, lion prides, and chimp troops don't have religion, but they have between-group conflict. As for the canons of rational thought, to the extent that brains evolved by natural selection, their main purpose is to cause organisms to behave adaptively in the real world, not to directly represent the real world. Our minds evolved to aid us in survival and reproduction. They are pattern matching machines that promote behavior which is good for our genes, and not particularly good at making a critical distinction between what Wilson calls factual reality and practical reality. And this propensity to favor adaptive fictions over factual reality for the good of our genes is what drives religious thinking, sometimes to our own detriment and in all aspects of human thought and endeavor. And that includes anti-theism or atheism or anything. Feminism, postmodernism, as Wilson puts it while explaining the concept of stealth religions. Adaptive fictions are not restricted to religions. Patriotic histories of nations have the same distorted and purpose-driven quality as religions, a fact that becomes obvious as soon as we consider the histories of nations other than our own. North Korea comes to mind. Intellectual movements such as feminism, postmodernism are often shamelessly open to yoking acceptable truths to perceived consequences. That's what it means to be politically correct. And scientific theories are not immune. Many scientific theories of the past become wildly implausible with the passage of time, just like religions. When this happens, they are often revealed as not just wrong, but purpose-driven. Practical reality versus factual reality. So scientific theories cannot be accepted to approximate factual reality when they are proposed, but only after they have been winnowed by empirical evidence. See, and I don't think the evidence is on the anti-theist side. It is this winnowing of ideas that gives science its power. But like all realms of human thought, from economics to atheism, these ideas are not immune from our human propensity to favor adaptive fictions over factual reality. This is why so many of us can look at climate change or abortion or tax policy or religion itself and come to vastly different conclusions about the facts and even factual reality itself. As Wilson puts it, it is humbling to contemplate that the concerns typically voiced about religion need to be extended to virtually all forms of human thought. If anything, non-religious belief systems are a greater cause for concern because they do a better job of masquerading as factual reality. Religions don't draw their practical value from factual premises. Scientific theories and models of the world do, though they are still very much susceptible to our tendency towards adaptive fictions, which provide practical value, mostly in the form of comfort for both us and our social groups. So Wilson has coined the term stealth religions to identify these purpose-driven belief systems, which largely deviate from factual reality. Even though these belief systems do not invoke divine powers or rest on some magical understanding of the world, they prey upon our religious psychology in the same way as any of the world religions do. Our minds have biologically evolved, as religions have culturally evolved, to function together in very pragmatic ways. Here Wilson explains the practical power of both religions and stealth religions alike. Wilson states, "The real world is full of messy trade-offs. When behaviors are evaluated for their effects on ourselves and others, for example, some are good for both us and others, or bad for both, bad for us and others, but many are good for some and bad for others. Any belief system that accurately represents the real world will include examples of all four possibilities: good for everyone, bad for everyone, good for us, bad for them, bad for us, good for them. All four possibilities. The main purpose of religion, or stealth religion, however, is not to describe the real world, but to motivate a given suite of behaviors. This is why feminism is a stealth religion. It's not designed to represent the real world. It's designed to motivate behaviors in people. One way to do this is by creating a stylized world without trade-offs, in which the prescribed behaviors are portrayed as good for you, good for me, and good for everyone. And the prohibited behaviors are portrayed as bad, bad, bad for everyone. Behaviors with mixed effects are absent from this stylized world because they do not clearly tell the believer what to do. Fundamentalist religions paint a picture of the world without trade-offs or pros and cons, very unlike the real world around us. This is by design, to propel its believers along a single path toward righteousness and away from ruin. Unfortunately, stealth religions, including many brands of anti-theism, do exactly the same thing. Wilson's chief complaint about militant atheism is the same as mine, that it's based on bad science. It's portraying an inaccurate representation of religion or factual reality, but effectively functioning as a stealth religion itself. So in an attempt to paint a more accurate understanding of religion, encompassing a much wider view of the present-day research and scientific consensus, Wilson proposes 4 scientific questions about religion and 6 possible answers. And these are very important because they relate to making good policy decisions. And atheists, ever since Richard Dawkins, are eager to throw their hat in the political ring. I just feel that they're doing this very ineffectively. We're supposed to be the science tribe. Using science for better policy decisions seems like a good idea to me. I call me crazy. So here are the questions. Q1, is there any scientific, i.e. empirically verified evidence for the existence of supernatural agents that intervene in natural processes, especially to alter human affairs? The basic God question. And obviously, as an atheist, I think there is none. Okay, so we move on to question 2. If not, how can we explain the phenomenon of religion in naturalistic terms? And I think that's where we're at. Q3, what are the impacts of religion, good or bad, on human welfare? And that's the question that I think anti-theists assume they're bad without looking at one lick of evidence. They all want to grab their anecdotal evidence. They want to bring out something they saw on the news and say, here, we have the evidence. Religion's all bad. Well, if it's here, that means evolutionarily, it's got to be a positive. Things that are here are just assumed to be a positive. Evolutionarily, you have to swim against the tide. You have to come up with crazy ideas to prove why they're here and not a positive, which is what many of the militant atheists and anti-theists have done. And we're going to go through those ideas here. So Q4, how can we use our understanding of religion to ameliorate its negative effects and advance the goals of secular humanism? And while I don't specifically think of myself as a secular humanist, I can respect the goal of peace and prosperity, or Sam Harris likes to call it human flourishing. I don't honestly believe many of us would be against a widespread increase in human flourishing, but it's difficult for me and many others to understand how we're going to advance the goals of human flourishing if we're working with an inaccurate naturalistic model of religion or human psychology. As Wilson so brilliantly explains, when vervant monkeys see a leopard, they give a specific alarm call that instructs everyone to head up into the trees. When they see an eagle, they give a different alarm call that instructs everyone to come down from the trees. Different threats require different actions. If religions pose a threat in modern life, we need to know what particular kind of threat so we can respond appropriately, just as the monkeys need to distinguish between leopards and eagles. Wilson points out 6 evolutionary hypotheses for religion, including those provided by Richard Dawkins and Daniel Dennett. And the rest. Wilson states, it would be amazing if the 6 evolutionary hypotheses, which are profoundly different from each other in their conception of religion, resulted in exactly the same plan of action for what to do about religion. So here are the 6 evolutionary hypotheses for religion. And some of these are still being used on YouTube today. Hypothesis 1, religion as a superorganism. Religions might forge human groups into cooperative units whose members work together to achieve common goals. Perhaps Emil Durkheim was right when he defined religion as a unified system of beliefs and practices relative to sacred things, which unite into one single moral community called a church, all those who adhere to them. Hypothesis 2, a form of exploitation. Religions might be sneaky ways for some members, presumably the leaders, to profit at the expense of other members of their own religion. Perhaps Karl Marx was right when he said, religion is the opium of the masses. Hypothesis 3, as a disease. Because culture is transmitted from person to person, it bears an intriguing resemblance to a disease organism. Just as disease organisms evolve to benefit themselves, often at the expense of their hosts, perhaps religions are highly evolved to facilitate their own transmission without benefiting human individuals or groups at all. Hypothesis 4, and I particularly like this one. As you'll know if you listen to my live stream with Noel, like a moth to the flame. Moths are adapted to navigate by celestial light sources, such as the moon and the stars, which are so far away that they enable the moths to fly in a straight line. Unfortunately, earthly light sources such as street lights and candles cause the moths to spiral inward to their deaths. This is an example of a byproduct, or what Stephen Jay Gould famously called a spandrel, a trait that has no benefit and can be very costly, but remains in the population by being connected to other traits that do have benefits. Perhaps religion is a costly byproduct of psychological traits that function adaptively in non-religious contexts. Hypothesis 5. Religion is like obesity. Our eating habits are killing us in today's fast food environment, but they were clearly adaptive in the food-poor environment of our ancestors. Perhaps religions were similarly adaptive in the Stone Age, when human groups were small and composed mostly of genetic relatives, but have gone awry in modern life. And Hypothesis 6. A roll of the dice. In biological evolution, there is something called genetic drift. Traits that we recognize as different have no effect on fitness and therefore increase or decrease in frequency at random. A neutral trait exists for no other reason than by chance. Few people would propose that all aspects of religion are neutral, but some aspects might be, resulting in a very real possibility of cultural drift. So from where I sit, it wouldn't just be amazing if our goals of maximizing well-being were compatible with all 6 of these very different understanding of religion. It's unfathomable. Wilson explains, each major evolutionary hypothesis comes to a different conclusion about the nature of religion, the degree to which it possesses a threat in modern life, and what we can do about it. That's why the debate is so important. We are not engaging in idle philosophizing, but making decisions that have important consequences in the real world. And though Wilson and others have honed in on the concept of religion that has the most evidentiary support, like so many Christians clinging to some rebranded understanding of creationism, I see a new generation of anti-theists tossing out real evidence in favor of unsubstantiated theories, motivated by a passionate desire to paint religion in the most toxic black and white light. As scientists and the scientifically minded, we are duty-bound to follow the evidence, wherever it may lead, not to build some new stealth religion out of psychological necessity. Wilson goes on to explain the perils of stealth religions, and in particular, this militant brand of anti-theism insofar as it functions as one. Sacred texts such as the Bible say so many things that almost any position can be supported by selecting the right passages. And so it is with scientific hypotheses. If we are allowed to pick and choose among them, we can support almost any position. If we regard religion as destructive, we can call it a delusion, or like the flame that fatally attracts the moth. If we admire religion, we can call it a group-level adaptation that in its purest form promotes universal brotherhood. Science hasn't made real progress until it tests among the hypothesis, enabling us to accept some and reject others. Only then can we make factual claims about the nature of religion, leading to practical decisions on the basis of those claims. While, as Wilson explains, biological and cultural evolution are messy processes with a lot going on at the same time, we are still increasingly acquiring mountains of evidence which support what Wilson calls the single most plausible hypothesis, the idea that religion binds us into a superorganism. As Wilson puts it, most enduring religions have what Emil Durkheim called secular utility. They define, motivate, and coordinate groups to achieve collective goals in this life. They promote cooperation within the group and bristle with defenses against the all-important problem of cheating. They score high on practical realism, no matter how much they depart from factual realism along the way. This is the hypothesis, Hypothesis 1, that's gaining consensus in academia. I think this is why anti-theism or militant atheism as a movement is in general dying. As Wilson points out, a transformation of the obvious is in progress with respect to the secular utility of religion, though YouTube, in many ways, is lagging behind. And this is so ironic to me. And longtime fans of mine will know how much I enjoy irony. Irony is like caviar for the mind. If Wilson and the many others are correct, and I am sure that they are, and despite this growing transformation, the YouTube atheist community continues to elevate the most toxic and anti-theist voices to positions of authority, despite what is an obvious and growing scientific consensus, the skeptic community will have effectively become the anti-science zealots they once so passionately confronted and rallied against. This is not a community reputable scientists and future policymakers will flock to be a part of. This is a community that will be relegated to the same fringe status as so many science-denying subcultures. So I have to ask, are YouTube atheists going to join other reputable interest groups and organizations in acknowledging the secular utility of religion? As Wilson explains, acknowledging the secular utility of religion makes religious systems more like secular systems, such as governments and business corporations, than they previously appeared. Everyone knows that governments and business corporations are supposed to deliver benefits in this world to their members, even when they fail, usually because of corruption from within. Religions appear different only because they depart so flagrantly from factual realism. If it turns out that there is method to religion's madness, then we can regard all enduring cultural systems as corporate units, as anthropologists were once fond of putting it. Wilson continues, once we begin to think of human groups of all sorts as like species interacting with each other in an ecosystem, what Wilson calls the ecological evolutionary paradigm, we can begin to think more constructively about how to manage between group interactions, religious and otherwise. Why some groups become organized by religion and others by cultural systems that we call secular is a great question, but it can only be addressed after we accept the factual claim that religious groups do function as corporate units, in contrast to the radically different concept of religions suggested by the other major hypotheses. These other major hypotheses are still the most cited evolutionary understandings of religion by the popular voices in the YouTube community, despite the fact they are, to this day, still untested conjecture. It is not a pro-science community that promotes unproven speculation over a growing scientific consensus. It is not a pro-science community that promotes popular belief as if it were ironclad fact. That is not pro-science. That is stealth religion. So what do we do? How do we proceed if we truly want the world to be a less religious place? Many YouTube skeptics are married to the idea that religion is no longer needed, that the world would just be hearts and flowers if we could just educate religion away. This is a bizarre claim for anyone familiar with the overwhelming scientific research, a claim nearly as implausible as a sky daddy casually flipping through our personal thoughts. Wilson provides the anti-religious some hope, but only if these militant atheists are willing to let go of their adaptive fictions in favor of real-world truths. Wilson explains, all the major theorists of the 19th century, such as Comte, Spencer, Durkheim, Weber, Marx, and Freud, believed that this would be the case, that religions would evaporate like so many other false claims. Here we are in the 21st century and religion seems to be stronger than ever. Does this mean religion will always be with us? Two political scientists that Wilson cites in his article, Norris and Engelhardt, think not. They propose that religion can indeed yield to secularization, but only under certain environmental conditions. But those conditions are not anything close to the conditions anti-religious activists so commonly advocate for here on YouTube. YouTube anti-theists are like vervant monkeys, calling out eagles when there are leopards all around. If skeptics and the anti-religious truly want to see a worldwide decline in religion, an accurate understanding and acceptance of the naturalistic realities of religion is the first step, and then a focused and sustained effort to shape public policy in smart and productive ways is the next. Wilson cites Norris and Engelhardt from their influential book, Sacred and Secular. Norris and Engelhardt identify existential security as a key environmental factor that determines whether society will become religious or secular. This is something YouTube skeptics cite all the time as evidence non-religious societies are healthier, happier, and more productive. But they get the causal relationship completely backwards. It's safer societies that become more secular, not the other way around. Tearing down religious institutions would be non-productive, even potentially harmful, if there are not secular institutions to fulfill the same needs. Those needs don't go away because you tore down the institution. Wilson continues, paraphrasing Norris and Englehart. If your life is likely to be disrupted by famine, war, disease, and major dislocations of all sorts, then you live in an environment that is low in existential security. Religions thrive in this kind of environment because it provides actual security, basic social services, including protection against other human groups, and also a psychological sense of security. If you confidently expect to go to college, start a family in your late 20s, have a job with health care, and live to a ripe old age, then you live in an environment that is high in existential security. Secularization thrives in this environment because religion isn't required to provide basic services, and the psychological comforts aren't worth the costs imposed by religious membership. Norris and Englehart base their work on the World Values Survey, a global investigation of political and societal change that includes dozens of nations in 4 separate waves, beginning in 1981 and most recently in 1999 to 2001. As Wilson points out, variation in religiosity across nations is strongly correlated with indicators of existential security, regardless of the region of the world or specific religious traditions. While YouTube atheists are constantly embroiled in the various inaccuracies in all manners of religious traditions, Norris and Englehart explain the extent to which sacred or secular orientations are present in a society can be predicted by any of these basic indicators of human development with a remarkable degree of accuracy, even if we know nothing further about the country. To explain or predict the strength and popularity of religion in any country, we do not need to understand specific factors such as the activities and roles of Pentecostal evangelism in Guatemala and Presbyterian missionaries in South Korea, the specific belief systems in Buddhism, the impact of madrasa teaching Wahhabism in Pakistan, the fundraising capacity and organizational strength of the Christian right in the U.S. South, the philanthropic efforts of Catholic missionaries in West Africa, the crackdown of freedom on worship in China, or divisions over the endorsement of women and homosexual clergy within the Anglican Church. What we do need to know, however, are the basic characteristics of a vulnerable society that generate the demand for religion, including factors far removed from the spiritual, exemplified by the levels of medical immunization, cases of AIDS or HIV, and access to an improved water source. If YouTube atheists and atheists really want to make the world a better place and bury religion like so many other failed ideologies, they would stop getting bogged down in the minutia and focus on promoting secular institutions that will inevitably displace these superstitious ones. As Wilson notes, religiosity and secularization are shifting their geographic distributions, exactly like biological species shifting their ranges in response to environmental changes. Secularization is spreading in the post-industrial nations, as noted above, but religiosity is spreading worldwide, in part because the least secure and most religious nations also have a much higher rate of population growth than the most secure ones. Wilson continues, science and reason are every bit as important for solving the problems of modern existence as the new atheists say, but they are not making their way into popular intellectual discourse or public policy. And this is a travesty. This is a grand miscarriage of both truth and justice. As Wilson puts it, the central problem of modern existence is how to increase existential security. That is something that everyone wants and the raison d'etre of religion. But achieving it in modern life on a worldwide scale is very much like building a skyscraper, a collective and consensus effort, careful and methodical, based on scientific knowledge. Somehow, intellectuals and policymakers of all stripes need to focus on this fact. And I worry that this call to action, to real action, is so often ignored by those who are so passionate on the topic. I worry the peril that faces all communities has stripped us of our clarity of thought, that our love of science and truth and discovery has been replaced by a fear and a hatred for those who disagree with us, blinded by the same kind of hate, blinding our intellectual adversaries. We have ultimately embraced a form of comfortable pseudoscience. We once would have had the fortitude, the strength of mind and character, and individualist pride to vigorously denounce, as the late astronomer Carl Sagan puts it in his literary masterpiece, The Demon-Haunted World. I worry that, especially as the millennium edges nearer, pseudoscience and superstition will seem year by year more tempting. The siren song of unreason more sonorous and attractive. Where have we heard it before? Whenever our ethnic or national prejudices are aroused, in times of scarcity, during challenges to our national self-esteem or nerve, when we agonize about our diminished cosmic place and purpose, or when fanaticism is bubbling up around us, habits of thought familiar from ages past reach for the controls. The candle flame gutters. Its little pool of light trembles. Darkness gathers. The demons begin to stir.
Her face cannot relate to the light.
You guys are killing me here. Honestly, why aren't you subscribing to my channel? Do you want me to wash your car? Do I have to take your sister out to lunch? Come on, subscribe already. Don't be shy. I can go after feminists. I'm cool. I know all the big words like MGTOW, social justice. Subscribe, please. I hate all the exact same people as you. Steve Shives, Christy Winters, that dumbass demotivator guy.
Motivator sucks!
You could validate my entire existence. Subscribe. Come back. It'll be fun.